you shoot a black and white, you're making this plan in the camera, and then you're going out and you have to make it work in the edit. That is what I'm going to show you today, is these three critical things that control the atmosphere of your black and white. What you see here should come through here. What we're actually going to do is go over here, and I'm going to show you 5 different approaches to edit the same photos. In fact, I'm going to give you for free 5 presets because I just put out the sampler from my Silver 5 preset pack. Come in to Lightroom, or you can be doing this in Capture One or in Camera Raw, or wherever you want. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to show examples of these 3 keys using just this Silver 5 sampler, and you're going to want to go further. Don't ever let someone pretending to be an expert tell you you shouldn't use presets or actions or styles or plugins. You can decide whether to make your own, whether to buy them, whether to download free ones, which sometimes are good, but sometimes not. Although in the case of the ones I'm giving you in the link below today, they're really, really good. Never let them tell you, hey, you shouldn't be using those. You're an amateur if you use those. If you're not using the tools that we have in our software and you're over here dinking around all the time, just tweaking around sliders, all it really means is you're editing less and doing less and completing your visualization less, but using the same amount of time. Of the 3 elements I'm going to show you today, the first is crispiness. Crispiness is like texture, clarity, sharpness, but it's all of them. So I don't want to say it's just texture, because it's not the same as saying, hey, let's go to the texture slider. Yes, you can add crispiness by going to the texture slider. It's kind of like a form of sharpening. You can do it in a little bit different way by using the clarity slider, which is more of a broad form. It's more of a high pass kind of filter. The surface, the elements that affect the atmosphere, the crispiness of a photo. I could play around with these, I could mess around with sliders, and I would simply be wasting my time, because far and away the best way to start editing in black and white is to go over to your presets or styles or actions. So let's just use only these free presets from Silver. Here's Fidelity 800. Now you can see that it kind of does a little bit of crushing in the blacks. There's some grain going on. And if you look over here, it's not doing a lot to the presence sliders. But because of the grain, there's a lot of atmosphere. There's a certain crispiness that the grain gives as well. As I go through this, Darkroom Crush is a really popular one from Silver, and it kind of pushes down the blacks. And we're going to come to this as we go through. I'm going to come back to that. Let's go to the Razors A. This one is very gritty. It's very intense. In fact, maybe too much for this. Now, I could go over here, of course. There's nothing wrong with manually editing your sliders once you have that starting point. I could turn down my clarity a little bit, for example. You don't always want sharpness. We have a tendency to think sharpness, good, non-sharpness, bad. And yet all these vintage lenses right here behind me, a lot of times I use them because they're not so crispy. They're not so sharp. A lot of times you want to downplay certain areas of crispiness. For example, maybe you want the water to be crispy, but you actually want to go around and reduce the crispiness in other areas so that the attention is actually drawn to that water, so that you're seeing the objects that you actually want to be seen in the scene. You see, it's a misnomer that you always want sharpness. If I was to choose on this, I would probably actually go back to this Fidelity 800 mix and then play with it a little bit. Maybe I would mod it. There's actually a mod kit, a few mod kit presets in here in the sampler as well that just kind of add on top. And you can see this is bringing a little bit more black and white contrast and mixing it together. The second element, which is the luminance. If I go to this portrait here and say, all right, we want to do black and white on this. If I go to that same Razors preset, watch what happens. It actually looks kind of terrible. It's way too much clarity. It's way too much intensity, and it's doing the wrong things entirely with those skin tones. Now I could go to this Yosemite light, which is a contrasty mix, but a lot more versatile. It tends to work on everything, but it's still too light. When we talk about luminance in a black and white photo, it's not only how we expose, it's not only the way the light is on the scene, but it's the way we convert. It comes down to how we use these sliders. And of course, you can do this manually, but one of the secrets is having your recipes with lots of variables of this. In this case, for example, I can turn up the orange and affect strongly the skin tones. If the orange is too low, it looks terrible. In practice though, I would go to something like Perfect Portrait. And you see that now this brings a completely different aesthetic. This is combining the elements of crispiness with the luminance. But if you look at this, it's actually bringing down clarity and presence. It's using dehaze, it's using contrast to soften the skin and the details on the subject and make it more portrait-like. Now that I've applied this formula, I can kind of control just where it goes simply by turning exposure up and down, whether I want it a little lighter or a little darker, and her skin is going to stay soft and beautiful. I could also use that Fidelity 800, which worked great on the waterfall and coincidentally works great on this as well, and gives me a little more of a rich filmic look with nice, delicious shadows. This brings us to the third point that I'm preaching to you guys all the time and I never let up on, and that is stop being afraid of blacks. Use the blacks. When you bring blacks in, those are what actually create the contrast. And I show this in my workshops, like in Shadow Hackers that you can find on my site, in my Exposed workshop. And one thing you're gonna see a lot, even in this sampler, is that we're doing really rich things with the shadows. Fidelity 800 is a great filmic look from silver. And yeah, it's in the free pack. I put it there, okay? Let's then go down to this AI tool. This one you'll only find in the Lightroom version because it uses all the AI rendering of Lightroom, which might bog your system down a little bit, but look what it does, how it just instantly converts this for our portrait, softens the face, separates from the background a little bit. So we can instantly go from here to here. And Fidelity 800 worked really good here. It's maintaining those shadows. The thing you want to remember as you're thinking about crispiness, luminance, and blacks is that the way you combine all those together is the magic. Actually, it's not as simple as, hey, let's just turn up clarity, let's turn down clarity. The way you mix that with the channels, with the curves and everything, is where you really can bring out those details. That's why when you edit a photo correctly in black and white, what you want to be doing is you want to be coming in and scrolling over. You already have a vision in your mind, but you want to be scrolling over until you find kind of the balance that works. So if I go to Perfect Portrait on this gentleman here, it honestly lacks a little punch. It needs a little something. Now I could go to the razors, because I only have one version of this in the sampler and his skin's a little dark, but we could change that around by mixing the sliders a little bit, or we could use a different variation of the preset. But see what's happening here is we're lightening these up and then playing with exposure. We have a lot of crispiness here, kind of giving us that classic Dave Hill look, but it's still super important that we balance that out. Also consider the luminance. We don't blow the highlights too much. This needs a little work on those, that we don't come back and screw up the blacks by taking away all our black and all our detail. You can download all the presets I showed you today, free, gratis, totalmente gratis, all right? And play with these and you'll see what I mean, because I carefully selected each one of these from the sampler to kind of represent these different things like portrait, grittiness, contrast, crush blacks, filmic. You're gonna see what I mean when you start applying these and how it will transform the way you edit if you're looking for the crispiness, the luminance, and the blacks, and not be intimidated by those blacks. Really emphasize those blacks, because if you start looking around, the great black and white photos almost always have rich, bold blacks that are unintimidated by what anyone says. So go forth, because these are going to be really versatile. They're just going to work. If you like what you see, obviously go further, check out my Silver 5 Complete Pack. I love it when you do that because it helps me keep making content, but play with these blacks. Let me know what you think in the comments. What are your favorite ways to edit black and white? And don't let yourself get overwhelmed and thinking, why is my black and white not the same on the screen as I visioned in the camera? You just need to stop manually playing with everything all the time and learn to use formulas to give yourself that starting point and complete your visualization, and learn to use the 3 keys of black and white editing: the crispiness, the luminance, and the black.